Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. Today, this 9th day of April 2013, we're going to be talking to not only the audience of Inform TV, but a special gathering that Senator Al Franken is having in Washington, D.C., his third annual Minnesota Congressional Delegation Hot Dish Competition and Luncheon. And Inform TV, I'm going to put out there a side dish of energy policy facts that I hopefully one of the staffers of the various groups there will have running off to the side. So while you folks in Washington are enjoying your wonderful hot dishes in your friendly little competition, you'll get an opportunity to look at some hardcore facts that I feel both you and the Republican and Democratic Party as well as administration is totally not focused on and must be focused on for the people of outstate Minnesota and rural America in general and for the nation when it comes to energy policy. Plain hard facts that aren't being addressed. And we come to you today with the same bipartisan opening that Senator Franken is bringing, just trying to bring people together. Yet here at Inform TV, we pick on people. I'm not running for office, so any of you delegation or your staff, when you're in the Alexandria Lakes area, are going on 94 towards Moorhead, that type of thing, you're always welcome to stop in here at Inform TV. I'm a one-man TV station off the Garfield Tower here with a 24/7 loop of programming that kind of replaced the Hubbard organization when they closed down here in Alexandria, and struggling to get on additional towers and even into the cable outlets here. So we've got a strong audience out here, but we're censored locally here by the cable outlets in Minnesota and a special interest group that truly is there, in my view and my experience, only to serve big media, the cell phone companies, and churches and other big money that just somehow want to be in the media business and have tied up all the licensing and that type of thing. Even though I'm a true TV producer, TV station, we just can't spread the word because we're just being robbed blind by the establishment out here. But with that, we want you to understand that we're here to try to help the situation, and we could care less if you're Republican or Democrat. We just want to solve problems, and we want people to be aware of what's actually happening. Now, I'm not a traditional, as my audience well knows, a traditional journalist. I'm not a journalist. I just report and analyze events and figures that are going on that the people here in the Alexandria Lakes area that have access to it really enjoy. And we hope this program allows you, the Minnesota 10, to spread the word of sound policy items that are being ignored and hard facts and figures that just don't make any sense and no longer can continue to go on. But with that, to bring my audience up for you folks watching us at your hot dish competition, I'm just going to read Senator Franken's introduction or invitation a little bit to my audience here so they know what's going on. On Wednesday, April 10th, Senator Al Franken will host his third annual competition to determine which member of the Minnesota Congressional Delegation makes the best hot dish casserole. He will be joined by Amy Klobuchar, Colin Peterson, Betty McCollum, Michelle Bachmann, Keith Ellenson, Tim Walz, Eric Paulson, and Rick Nolan. And the senator goes on here to say that in 2011, he started this friendly competition as a way to bring the delegation together to put partisanship aside and celebrate a Minnesota culinary tradition. While each member provides a hot dish, that type of thing. And he has, for judges, he has Vin Weber, who used to be my former congressman, so I say hi to you, Vin. and Jerry Sikorsky, a former congressman that as a sugar lobbyist and a person of means in those days, would go both to the fundraisers for Vin Weber on Green Lake, where I had a cabin for a number of years with the big shots in western Minnesota, Earl B. Olson, Jenny O. Foods fame, and go to Jerry Sikorsky's fundraisers on Lake Minnetonka. I always liked what you used to do, Jerry, because you weren't one of those cheap Democrats with a bean feed. You always put on a first-class operation when we would go to the Twin Cities to lobby you, and if I remember right, I always rewarded Jerry, Vin, Rick Nolan, Colin Peterson with a nice check for being supportive to the sugar industry in Minnesota. But anyway, so when I look at the delegation, Rick Nolan should remember me when I had him get me a short notice meeting with Tip O'Neill, and where Rick Nolan, Chuck Canton, and Alan Reppy got in, and we sold sugar policy to Tip O'Neill. The only farm policy that stood the test of times without subsidies, and clearly should be the guideline for this next farm bill. And because there's no reason, in fact, there's been no reason for a decade or two, a couple decades, to have any direct payments going to our farmers anymore. In fact, crop insurance is actuarial sound. It's even ridiculous to be giving our Minnesota farmers $512 million, as we did in 2012, to subsidize their crop insurance when we have corn, soybeans, wheat, sugar beets, all the crops at historically high prices and that type of thing. But in this process here, we don't want to lose any of you when you're enjoying your hot dish, because at the same time, while I'm doing this program, in the footnotes here, and rightfully so, it says, the event is only open to members of the media, members of the Minnesota Congressional Delegation, and their staff. So, which I think is very appropriate for all you folks there. And I think it's a great opportunity to Inform TV, to give you something to really chew on when you're enjoying your luncheon with your fellow colleagues there in the media, staffers in Congress that I used to deal with as a lobbyist in Washington and St. Paul, that type of thing, as well as you members of Congress. And here's what I want to offer up to you, a few simple guidelines that show energy policy in this country is a disaster. Gasoline prices should be at $2 a gallon. There's no question about that. I think Michelle Bachmann mentioned something of that when she was running. But the truth of the matter is, if we would just address sound energy policy, which includes some plug-in hybrid vehicles, and the fact that our consumption of crude oil is dropping dramatically, and we're finding all this natural gas, there's absolutely no reason we're paying $3.50 a gallon in outstate Minnesota or across Minnesota, $3.60 or something nationwide. It should not be happening, people, and especially to you folks there in Washington that are watching this, and I'll put it on YouTube as well as the tower here in Alexandria. But here's what I want you fine folks in Washington to look at, and I've showed some of this to my audience here of Inform TV before, and we do have some people in Washington. The EIA, there's a few people within the organization. I wouldn't say that for the administrative people there, but you can kind of watch what's going on here with ending stocks of crude oil going way back. And we go through the 70s here. We show the crude supply has just went up dramatically. And when we first got into some of these unbelievable acceleration of energy prices in the 90s and early 2000, folks. The reality, our supply on hand was down, but the truth of the matter is it was still adequate. But what's happening now? From 2000, we were looking at an inventory of 824 million barrels of crude oil. Now, as you can see, we're well over 1 billion barrels of crude oil in reserve, both the strategic reserve and in tanks and that type of thing around the United States. There is no shortage of crude oil in any manner, shape, or form. And at the same time, we're kicking crude oil production up substantially. Suddenly it's in the 7.1 million barrels per day domestically. The truth of the matter is, if we would have some policies to drill in some additional areas, or even drill in some, or pump in some of the wells that are presently tapped, either I would say mainly by big oil rather than the wildcatters, we could get our production up easily another 1 million barrels a day domestically. And but so stocks are fine, production both in the United States and the world are fine. High prices do what? They bring on production, no matter what the product is. But here's what I want you folks in Washington to be thinking as you're enjoying your hot dish there, and whether you're members of the media or staff, or hopefully some of you 10 are watching this as well. And here's what I want you to look at. The 4-week average of imports of crude oil and petroleum products. And when we look back in the time of all of you there, probably most of you in the delegation were in office or shortly after this. When we look at the 4-week average of U.S. imports of crude oil and petroleum products, you can see it peaked here in the summer of 2006, just shy of 15 million barrels per day that we were bringing in, importing combination of gasoline, diesel fuel, heavy oils, but mainly crude at that point in time. And what has happened? So here we're looking at our guide over here. We're looking at 15 million barrels a day. What's our chart showing here? Now we're below 10 million barrels a day. Just think of that, people. We're below 10. Yet you folks in Washington have not caught up with that or spreading the word. And I, as an independent analyst that just want to report facts and figures, not a journalist, I'm probably the only TV personality, a one-man show that says I don't even read and write, at least in the tradition of the so-called journalist and professional media. We just want to report facts here and be an independent and bring back what? Just hard press that challenges any and all of you if you need challenging. But here's what I'm getting at. When in 2006 we were talking about bringing in just shy of 15 million barrels of crude oil and crude oil products, what are we doing now? In 2013, we started the year bringing in right at 10 million barrels a day, and a combination of the economy the way it is, the effects of the 2% Social Security withholding that we have to do because we have to maintain Social Security. What are we now, folks, as you enjoy your hot dish here? We're looking, now we're down to 9.4 million barrels per day and trailing off faster yet of what we just talked about here, combination of better mileage. And if we would get you people to push these car companies, and especially the fat cats out there, to buy a plug-in hybrid similar to what the Volt would do, we're going to find out that the average driver in the United States, if he had some battery power of going just 40 miles per day, a lot of these people, especially our senior citizens, would hardly ever use any gasoline anymore. That's how significant sound energy policy would be. And what do we have to do in the process of getting it? We have to look at these numbers that I'm showing you here. Remember now, we're below 10 million barrels. We're getting down to 9 million barrels. In 2006, we're at 15. A mind-boggling decrease in imports of crude oil and crude oil product. But here's the problem that I want you guys that are enjoying your hot dish as you watch this, is to focus on and implement a policy to address it. And that is this, what I think is the most despicable, unbelievable policy, people, is the fact that we're exporting a record amount of crude oil and crude oil products. And no one here in outstate Minnesota or across the country buys this stuff if we start exporting natural gas and crude oil and crude oil product. It brings jobs in. Yeah, it brings jobs in for the fat cats in the oil industry, but the rest of us people out here have been just devastated by high-priced gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, that type of thing. And the reality is, if we're going to export energy, we do it in the form of finished products that what? Give jobs here to people in Minnesota and the United States. We're not going to be a third world country exporting raw products. And we should be looking at the same thing on the agriculture end, especially soybeans. We should be doing like Argentina does. They export meal and oil. They are not a big exporter of the beans themselves unless they're willing to get a super high price. But here's what I want you folks, as you're enjoying your hot dish luncheon and all the long hours you put in. I've been out there with you. I know it's a fact. Traditionally, people, we want you to understand that if you push this chart back a little more, we used to only export about 250,000 barrels per day of crude oil and crude oil products. All of a sudden, when we got in the 90s here, we started exporting 1 million barrels a day. But look at this chart from 1990 here all the way to 2006. We were at 1 million barrels. And in this 2006, remember that, we were bringing in 15 million barrels, but we're only exporting 1 million. Probably not much of any of a market factor. Nothing that we that live in rural Minnesota here with basically reduced wage levels, and we got a lot of hardworking people that are just struggling to get by with all the economic events are going on, concerned about housing. We've got a lot of policies that we need to be addressed, and we talk about them all the time here. We don't care. We step on the bankers' toes, the school board's toes here in town, the county commissioners. We just talk facts here. And hopefully you help us get our signal out so we can talk facts to all the people in Minnesota. But anyway, what I want you to look at here, and I'll let the technology that the EIA is using here, in 2005, coming into 2006, we were basically at about 875,000 barrels per day of crude oil and crude oil products going out of the country. Then what happened in 2006? They just took off. And why? Because the way the infrastructure was here in the United States, and the fact Canada was getting into these oil sands and that type of thing, all of a sudden, what do we have? We had a surplus of crude oil here. And when you looked at the market factors that the so-called pundits and analysts would never show in the proper way, like we did here at Inform TV, all of a sudden this Brent crude compared to West Texas Intermediate crude on a gravity basis, historic basis, the West Texas is still probably slightly better, but the Brent is a blend of world crudes and from a standpoint about Eagle. And for years they traded at the same level. And all of a sudden, what happened? They took off because we were still importing a lot of oil, plus we were getting production ramped up, we were getting Canadian oil, we were getting other crude and that type of thing from the Western Hemisphere here, and so the spread just kept getting wider and wider, which meant that all of a sudden, for the refiners, there was a great opportunity for them. Instead of lowering the price for American gas and diesel fuel, they would just export this at a mind-boggling margin, you people there in Washington having hot dish. Yet it's not being focused on. It's focused on a negative thing. Oh, it's jobs. Jobs, it hasn't affected what we need out here in rural Minnesota and across the nation. We need energy prices at a reasonable level where the people drilling, refining, whatever, they make a margin, but they don't gouge the people like they've been doing for the last decade or so here. But anyway, I want you to look at this, you folks eating your hot dish out there. When we're sitting at 847,000 barrels on the last day of 2005, in other words, starting 2006, look what happened, folks. We just went up and up and up. And when we got to the end of 2008, all of a sudden we went wild. We were here at still on the 19th of day of December 19th, 2008, we were only at 1.4 million barrels of exports of crude oil and crude oil products. Look what happened, people, by the end or this time of the year in 2012. We're at 3.2, or just about at 3.2. We doubled exports of crude oil while the consumers out here in outstate Minnesota, state of Minnesota, across the United, were just getting gouged by the price of gasoline, diesel fuel, and home heating oil. And you folks here in Washington have forgotten when I'm an old man now, we always had diesel fuel and home heating oil way cheaper than gasoline. And yet now it's just the opposite. Why? Because we're allowing these fat cat oil refiners, oil companies, to make big money by taking cheaper crude here and putting it on the world market based on the cost of Brent. It's a really great deal that's happening for the oil industry, and there's no wonder we have Exxon now, once again, the biggest, private company in the world. Yet at the same time, I like certain things about Exxon. I would like to see Rex Tillerson the next president of the United States, because he understands energy. He's dealt with OPEC. He's dealt with every leader in the world. And so you Republicans there, you should be contacting Rex Tillerson and get a real businessman, a person of true substance and experience. Even though he's in the oil industry, if you ever watch some of his interview with media people, he's the guy we need in 2016, not Hillary. But anyway, so when we jumped way up here in early 12, we were at almost 3.2, and then we got up here in 13 to almost 3.3 million barrels per day of going out of the country. Just think of that, people. So what am I asking of you folks there? Enjoying your hot dish, some camaraderie with the people, whether it's media, staff, or hopefully better yet, all 10 of you watching this from the Minnesota Congressional Delegation. We need to shut off, kaboom, the exports of crude oil and crude oil product. As historically the #1 energy consumer as well as energy importer. I think China passes us now on crude oil and crude oil products. At least they did here for a week or two in 2013, and I think they will continue to replace us. Thank goodness, if we've start to look at sound energy policy. And that's what I'm getting at here, people. When you look at the difference, when we were talking about 15 million barrels coming in on this other chart that I had up there, when you take the fact that we're exporting 3 now and we're really only importing 6, when we look back at the other chart here, our exports, our imports are at 9, I should say, and our exports are 3. We only need 6 million barrels per day. Just think of that. And when we look at that, what does that show, people? We don't need OPEC oil anymore. If you look at some of the numbers, and there's tons of numbers to look at, we don't need any oil coming from the Persian Gulf. If we would get the Venezuelan oil, we'd be fine. Everything right now could come out, and we help the Canadians and the Mexicans and start drilling in some additional sources, whether it's Alaska or in the Gulf or the East Coast, the West Coast, that type of thing. And then better yet, use those plug-in hybrids like the Volt or that type of car that's coming available in all the makes and models. People, energy consumption drops dramatically. And as you're getting ready to exit, I'm sure, I want you people to look at one other issue on the Minnesota front that I think is important, and that is the Bakken here. We as a state, and you folks here in Washington as our congressional delegation, are totally ignoring the fact that the Bakken here in western North Dakota is real close to Minnesota. And why don't we have a pipeline system that brings that crude into our refiners, even though I think in the future we're going to be refining a lot less crude oil. And the reality is, the viewers of Informed TV got to go through the refinery, not the refinery, but the fuel terminal and Sauk Center on camera with, and watched ethanol blending and that type of thing. But the reality of the New Star pipeline that goes from the Jamestown-Mandan area, they've got a refinery out there, I believe, goes straight towards Jamestown into Moorhead, where they've got a big tank farm like Magellan's got here in Alexandria, and then basically goes down 94, has got an outlet there in Sauk Center, and then goes to Roseville. And the reality is, we as a state and you as our congressional delegation should see what it takes to work with New Star, or whether the state should have, when we're not spending real money anymore, we're spending Bernanke bucks and borrowing all this product. Should we as a state be seeing there's a crude oil pipeline coming along that New Star right away that does 2 things. It gets all this oil in the Bakken here, that they find more and more oil and gas all the time, and at the same time we need that Keystone pipeline big time, and it should be routed its original shortest route, but unfortunately because of bad politics and misunderstanding how the ecosystem works, my understanding they're going to be coming down the east side of North Dakota. So we as a state should have that pipeline also available to tap Canadian crude oil. And we have the traditional ones of bringing oil in from the south, and we would have sound energy policy here in the state of Minnesota. And as I'm running out of time for this episode, the other thing I want you people at the Hot Dish Luncheon to think about is we should go to one grade of fuel. I've been doing, in fact, I got a state agency here of some investigation I did of the Magellan pipeline here. We found out that Cenex, our good Minnesota co-op, because of little or no price differential, has been using 87 octane gasoline as their blend component for a number of years. And so We've been pushing out 89.5, yet we don't have regulatory people telling the consumers in this area that they don't need to pay 12 cents more for 89 octane at Super America. Maybe the 87 octane at Super America is just like Cenex is marked 87. So there's a number of things on energy that we'd like to talk to you about, but we appreciate this opportunity to be part of your luncheon today. Thank you, Al Franken. Thank you, the delegation of Minnesota. Remember, you're always welcome in Alexandria Lakes area to talk politics, policy, whatever you want to talk about. Love to have you here at Inform TV. We're tough, but we're reasonable. And for my audience, as always, thanks for listening to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota.